I always hated holiday dinners at our house. In fact, it was just an imitation of family warmth, strained smiles, meaningless toasts, and unspoken words that hung in the air like fine dust. But on this evening, my mother's 60th birthday, something was different. Brianna, you've overcooked the vegetables again, my mother said quietly as I placed a plate of broccoli and carrots on the table. Her narrow lips curled into a familiar grimace of disappointment. I didn't say anything. For 35 years, I had become accustomed to such comments. It was like an unspoken rule. No matter what I did, it was never good enough. But the wine is just wonderful, my younger sister Mercedes interjected, raising her glass gracefully. Her perfect manicure sparkled in the light of the antique crystal chandelier, the same one our father had restored himself 20 years ago. I brought it back specially from Napa when I was there last month to meet with clients. My mother beamed. Of course, Mercedes was her pride successful, sophisticated, with a career in a prestigious real estate company. Is this your last birthday in this house, Mom? Mercedes suddenly asked with a hint of a smile, as if to say, I'm just a nurse at a community hospital who left a promising job in Portland 5 years ago to come back to care for my father after he had a stroke. She gave me a quick glance, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The spoon froze halfway to my mouth. Something was going on, something I didn't know about. Maybe, my mother said cryptically, although who knows where life will take me after I retire. A few other people were sitting at the table, Aunt Judy and her husband Paul, my mother's cousin Randall and his wife Beverly, and our neighbor Mrs. Pearson, who had been a family friend for decades. They all exchanged uncomprehending glances, which only increased my anxiety. As we moved into the living room for coffee and dessert, I felt the air become heavy, like before a storm. My father's favorite clock in the corner chimed 8 times, and it was at that moment that my mother put her cup on the table and turned to me. Brianna, I have an announcement. Her voice was clear and decisive. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. I looked at my mother, trying to understand if I had heard correctly. What? My voice was barely audible. I rewrote the will, she continued in the same business-like tone. After your father died last year, I thought a lot about the future. Mercedes is in a better position to keep this house in good shape. Besides, I'm moving to Arizona, where I bought a small house. I don't need this big space anymore. I felt the room start to spin around me. I spent 5 years here taking care of my father. 5 years of waking up every night when he called me, changing his bed when he couldn't get up, reading to him when his eyesight began to fail. But I tried to gather my thoughts. I thought that your father wanted the house to stay in the family. My mother interrupted me abruptly. And it will. It will just go to Mercedes. Mercedes sat there with a subtle smile, wiggling her foot in an expensive leather shoe. She didn't even visit when my father got worse. I called her 3 times that last week, begging her to come say goodbye, but she was too busy with an important deal. When do I have to leave? I asked, feeling my voice tremble. You have 48 hours to get your things, my mother replied, looking off into the distance, not at me. This house belongs to your sister now. I heard Aunt Judy gasp and Mrs. Pearson whisper something. Randall looked stunned, and his wife, Beverly, looked down. 48 hours? I repeated. After 5 years of taking care of Dad? Mercedes interjected. Your things can be packed in a few hours. Don't be so dramatic, Bree. I remembered how last year, when he was very weak, he called me to him. His fingers, once strong, were now thin and trembling as he squeezed my hand. Bree, he whispered then, using my childhood nickname that no one else used. Promise me that you will take care of the house. It's not just walls and a roof, This is our history. 3 generations of Harlows have lived here. Don't let it leave the family. I promised. And now I stood here, betrayed and powerless. Everyone was waiting for my reaction, an explosion of anger, tears, pleas. But I felt a strange calmness that enveloped me like a protective shell. I just nodded. Okay, I said. 48 hours. The surprise on my mother's face was almost a pleasure. She was expecting a scene, a drama, maybe even wanted it. Another proof that I was unstable, emotional, impractical. Not as perfect as Mercedes. Just that, Brianna? She asked, sounding slightly irritated. I shook my head. It's your house, Mom. It's your decision. I clearly remember a moment from my childhood when I was maybe 8 years old. I was diligently preparing a drawing for a school competition, an autumn landscape with our house. My mother looked at my work and grimaced. Why do you always choose such dark colors? Look at what Mercedes painted. Bright, sunny. Your drawing looks gloomy. I stayed up all night trying to redraw the picture brighter. But in the morning, my mother just shrugged her shoulders. It's still not the same. Now, 27 years later, I was no longer trying to please. I got up from the table. If you don't mind, I'd better start packing. The birthday party was ruined. The guests shifted uncomfortably, wishing they were anywhere but here. Aunt Judy gave me a sympathetic look, but said nothing. No one said anything. As I walked up the stairs to my room, I could hear Mercedes discussing with her mother what furniture she planned to replace and how to freshen up the interior. It was as if I had already disappeared, evaporated, turned into a ghost in my own home. In the room where I had been sleeping for the past 5 years, I sat down on the bed and looked around. Not much had changed since my teenage years. The same blue blanket, shelves of books, an old rocking chair that my father had restored. I ran my hand along the wooden headboard, feeling the familiar curves of the carvings under my fingers. Outside the window, an old maple tree rustled, its leaves illuminated by a street lamp casting fanciful shadows on the wall. How many nights did I spend watching these shadows, dreaming of escaping from this house where I always felt inferior, and then I came back voluntarily when I was needed. Instead of tears and despair, I felt a strange clarity. 48 hours. That was more than enough. I took out a notebook and a pen from my desk drawer. I began to make a list, methodically, calmly, what to take with me, what to leave behind, who to call. Looking at my reflection in the dresser mirror, I saw something new in my own eyes, a firm determination that I hadn't noticed before. Perhaps it was a gift from my father, his last instruction. He always said, Bree, the most important thing is to know when to back down and when to fight back. The time had come to fight back, but not in the way her mother and Mercedes expected, not with screams and tears. Oh no, I had a different plan. Picking up the phone, I dialed the number. After the third ring, a familiar voice answered. Silas Decker here. Mr. Decker, it's Brianna Harlow, I said calmly. Can we meet tomorrow? After hanging up, I went back to my list. 48 hours, starting the countdown. Silas Decker's office looked exactly the same as it did 5 years ago when I'd visited with my father. The same dark wood paneling on the walls, massive bookshelves with legal volumes, the smell of old leather and lemon polish. Even the creak of the parquet underfoot was the same. Thank you for taking the time on such short notice, Mr. Decker, I said, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. Silas Decker, Harlow's family lawyer for over 30 years, looked at me carefully over his thin-rimmed glasses. His graying hair was neatly combed back, and on his desk, as always, was a photograph of his late wife. Brianna, I was going to contact you myself, he said, folding his hands on the desk, but I thought I'd wait until at least a year after your father's funeral. I took a deep breath. The memory of my father's funeral was still too fresh. Mercedes, in an impeccably tailored black suit, accepted condolences as if she were an only child. I stood aside, holding my mother's hand as she began to stagger. None of the guests even suspected that I had been in charge of my father's last months, not Mercedes. Yesterday, Mother told me that she had rewritten her will, I said. The house goes to Mercedes, and I have been given 48 hours to move out. Silas Decker raised his eyebrows in surprise, and then his face took on an expression of deep concern. Irene did this? He asked, taking off his glasses. This is unexpected. Unexpected to me, but apparently not to Mercedes, I replied. Mr. Decker, I remember that your father talked to you a lot about his will before he died. Was there a clause about the house? Decker sighed and got up from the table. He walked over to a safe hidden behind a painting of an autumn landscape and pulled out a folder of documents. Wilfred was very specific about his will, he said, returning to the table. I was transported back in time again. My childhood wasn't unhappy. I just always felt like I was in the background, like an extra in a play where Mercedes played the main role. I was 7 years old when Mercedes was born. I remember how my dad took me in his arms and brought me to the hospital bed where my mom was lying with the baby. Look, Bree, he said, how beautiful she is, your sister. And she really was beautiful, with fluffy dark hair and big blue eyes. Everyone said that she looked like my maternal grandmother, a famous beauty in our town. I looked like my father, with reddish hair, freckles on my nose, and a little clumsy. My little helper, my father used to call me when we worked together in his workshop. But for my mom, I was always too loud, too inattentive, too not like Mercedes. Over the years, the gap only widened. Mercedes was the star of the ballet school, an excellent student, the school beauty. I was just Brianna, a good student, but not brilliant. I played in the school orchestra, but not solo. I participated in swimming competitions, but I didn't win any medals. I was a shadow of my younger sister. When I turned 18, I chose to go to college as far away from home as possible in Oregon. Brianna can't wait to get away from us. My mom once said at Christmas dinner when I came home for the holidays, "It's a good thing we have a Mercedes." I didn't say that I wrote letters every week to my father and that I called when I knew Mom was at work to talk to Dad. It was our little secret. After college, I started working as a nurse, first in a small clinic, then in a large hospital in Portland. I liked my job. I felt needed. I had my own apartment, friends, even a few serious relationships, although none of them grew into anything more. Then, 5 years ago, Mercedes called. Dad had a stroke, she said without introducing herself. He's in the hospital. Mom won't be able to take care of him when he gets out. Can't you help? I asked, already knowing the answer. Bree, I just got a promotion. I can't give up everything for. She trailed off. You're a nurse. It's your job to take care of the sick. I didn't tell her that taking care of my own father and being a nurse were different. I didn't say that I had just been promoted to head nurse of the department. I just agreed to come. My father was lying in a hospital bed, pale, with the right side of his body half paralyzed. He tried to smile when he saw me, but it was crooked. Bree, he whispered, you came. 2 weeks later, he was discharged home with a list of care recommendations. I took an indefinite leave of absence from work and stayed. The first months were the hardest. My father could only move around with a walker, needed help with the simplest things, getting dressed, washing, eating. My mother worked full-time at the local library and was too tired to help when she got home. Mercedes would visit once a month, usually on weekends, bringing expensive gifts and telling me about her successes. Have you ever thought about going back to work, Bree? She asked during one of those visits. Sitting here in this old house, it's so boring. I didn't say anything at the time. I didn't tell her that taking care of my father was a full-time job, that I wake up every night when he calls, that I'm learning to cook his favorite dishes, even though I've never been a good cook, that I read to him for hours when he feels lonely. Over time, my father began to recover. A year after the stroke, he could walk with a cane, dress himself, and even work a little in his workshop. We spent a lot of time there together. He showed me. I did it under his guidance. We refinished an old wardrobe, repaired an antique clock, and restored several dining room chairs. This house is full of history, Bree, he once said, stroking the wooden surface of a table his grandfather had made. We Harlows have always been the keepers of these things, these memories. At the time, I didn't realize how important these words would become. 2 months before he died, my father became worse. He could no longer go down to the studio and spent most of his time in his chair by the window or in bed. One evening, when I brought him tea, he took my hand. Bree, promise me something, he said quietly. Anything, Dad. Promise me that you will keep the house in the family. 3 generations of Harlows have lived here. Don't let him leave the family. I didn't know why he was asking me, and not Mercedes or Mom, but I promised. And now, sitting in Silas Decker's office, I felt like I'd broken that promise. Wilfred left the house to both of his daughters, Decker said slowly, flipping through the documents, with the condition that you, Brianna, have the right to live there as long as you provide care for Irene if she needs it. I felt my heart skip a beat, but my mom said, 2 months ago, Irene came to me with a power of attorney that Wilfred had signed before the stroke, Decker continued, giving her the right to dispose of the property as she sees fit. Technically, it's legal, but my father had other intentions. I finished for him. I tried to talk her out of it, but Irene was adamant. She said that Wilfred had always wanted Mercedes to get the house because you, Brianna, had never been interested in the family property. It wasn't true, and we both knew it. But what could I say? That my father trusted only me with his true wishes, not a lawyer or even his wife. Can I appeal this? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. In theory, yes, Decker said, but it's a long process, expensive, and without a guarantee of success. A power of attorney is legally binding. I nodded, feeling the resolve I'd made last night only grow stronger. There's something else, Decker said, pulling out another document. Wilfred left this for you personally. He handed me an envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting. Since his right hand had weakened after a stroke, he had learned to write with his left, slowly but legibly. He asked me to give this to you in case there were problems with the house, Decker explained. He said you would understand. I took the envelope, feeling my fingers tremble. What had my father left me? What message from the past? Mr. Decker, I began cautiously, I have one more question. What rights does Mercedes have to the things in the house? Furniture, paintings, personal items? Decker looked at the documents again. According to Wilfred's original will, all items that he personally restored or created were to go to you, Brianna. Given his skill as a carpenter and restorer, that's a significant portion of the interior. But Irene might try to challenge that too. I felt a plan forming in my head, not the one my mother or Mercedes expected. Thank you, Mr. Decker, I said, standing up. You've been a great help. He stood up too, looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and concern. Brianna, what are you going to do? I smiled, perhaps for the first time in 2 days. What my father would have expected me to do. To protect the family legacy. On the way out of Decker's office, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper with a short message and a key. I read my father's message and realized that he had foreseen everything. Even my mother's betrayal, even my confusion. He had left me a path not to keep the house, but to something much more important. When I returned home from my meeting with Silas Decker, the clock in the living room read 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I had 30 hours before the end of the ultimatum. The key and my father's note were in my jacket's inside pocket, like a little talisman. The house was empty. My mother had told me at breakfast that she was spending the day with friends in the city, apparently celebrating her 60th birthday and settling the house issue. I appreciated the irony of the situation. I had complete freedom of action in the house from which I was being kicked out. The first thing I did was call Audrey, my oldest friend from high school. She was the only one who had stayed in touch all these years, even when I moved to Portland. Bree, that's terrible. She was outraged to hear my story. They can't just throw you out on the street after everything you've done for your father. Unfortunately, they can, I replied, looking at my father's photo on the mantelpiece. I need a place to stay for a few weeks until I can find my own place. Don't even think about a hotel, Audrey said firmly. Dash, I have a spare room. You can stay as long as you want. Audrey had always been like that, straightforward, generous, ready to help without asking. After her divorce 2 years ago, she moved to a small cottage on the outskirts of town, where she lived with her Labrador Maxwell. Thank you, I said, feeling the tears coming for the first time in these crazy days. I won't forget this. Okay, we can feel sorry for ourselves later. Audrey practically cut me off. We have to act now. What can I do? Can you come by tomorrow morning with the van? I'll ask someone else to help with the heavy stuff. After talking to Audrey, I went up to the attic. There, amidst the dust and cobwebs, were boxes of family heirlooms, old photo albums, letters, documents. I knew that my mother had hardly ever been up here, and Mercedes was only interested in things that had material value. When I found what I was looking for, a box of my father's personal papers, I opened it carefully. Among the yellowed sheets, I found old drawings of furniture made by his hand, photographs of items he had restored, invoices and receipts for materials. I wrote down the names and dates of every object my father had created or restored during his lifetime. The list was long, over 40 items, from a massive dining room table to my mother's fragile jewelry box. Then I methodically walked through the rooms, took pictures of each item on the list, and marked its location. No chance, no emotional decision. Everything was according to plan. When I finished with the inventory, I started with my personal belongings. Clothes, books, a few souvenirs. All of this could be packed quickly. But there were things that had a special meaning for me. The collection of books that my father and I had collected together, his restoration tools that he gave me, the blanket that my grandmother knitted when I was born. I didn't realize that several hours had passed until I heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Looking out the window, I saw my sister's white Mercedes. The irony was not lost on me. Mercedes entered the house without knocking, as if she already considered it her own. The keys in her hand jingled like triumphant bells. "Oh, you're still here," she said when she saw me on the stairs. "How's the packing going?" "Good," I replied calmly. "My friends are helping me move tomorrow morning." Mercedes nodded as she took off her elegant coat and threw it over the banister. Even in jeans and a sweater, she looked like a magazine cover model. "I thought I'd help," she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. I almost laughed at this sudden demonstration of family solidarity. For 5 years, she had barely been there when my father needed help. But now that the house was involved, she suddenly remembered her sisterly duty. "Thanks, but I'm almost done with my personal stuff," I replied. "The furniture is staying, of course." "Yes, about that." Mercedes walked into the living room, looking around as if she were seeing it for the first time. "I'm planning a major renovation. This old furniture is so provincial. It doesn't fit in with the modern design. I clenched my fists, but kept my expression calm. Really? This provincial furniture is antique works of art. Some people pay a lot of money for such things. Mercedes shrugged. Maybe, but it's not my style. Besides, I don't plan to live here. After a little renovation, I'll put the house on the market. I froze, not believing my ears. You're selling the house? But Dad always wanted it to stay in the family. 3 generations of Harlows have lived here. Oh God, Bree, don't start with the sentimental stories. Mercedes sighed, rolling her eyes. An old one with a lot of problems, by the way. I've been offered a job in Madrid, a company representative office in Europe. I'm not going to lose this opportunity for the sake of some family tradition. I looked at my sister, realizing that I didn't know her at all. For her, the house was just an asset that could be converted into money. For me, it was a living history of our family. And Mom? I asked. Does she know about your plans? Mercedes looked away, and for the first time, I noticed something akin to embarrassment in her. Of course she does. Just not all the details. She thinks I might be renting the house or something. I'll tell her everything when the time comes. When the money is in your account, you mean, I clarified. Don't judge me, Brianna. Mercedes suddenly snapped. Not everyone has the luxury of living in the past like you. Some of us look to the future. I didn't answer. There was no point in arguing. The plan that was forming in my head became even clearer. I'm going upstairs to finish packing, I said, turning toward the stairs. Wait, Mercedes stopped me. There's something else. Mom's lawyer said you can claim some things in the house, something that Dad supposedly left to you personally. I turned and looked at her. Yes, there is something. I'll pick it up tomorrow, don't worry. What kind of things? She insisted. I smiled without answering. Mercedes frowned. Look, Bree, I don't want to fight. But let's be realistic. You can't take everything you want just because you took care of Dad. It was your choice. Yes, it was my choice, I agreed. And believe me, I will only take what is rightfully mine. After this conversation, Mercedes quickly found an excuse to leave. I watched her get into the car, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and determination. We had never been close, but now the gap between us seemed unbridgeable. Returning to my packing, I reread the note from my father that I had found in the envelope from Silas. Bree, if you're reading this, it means that what I feared happened. The key opens a vault in the workshop floor under the workbench. There you will find everything you need to protect what is really important. Remember, it's not about the walls, it's about the history they hold. Your dad. I took the key out of my pocket and headed for my father's workshop in the basement. It was almost exactly the same as the day he died. Tools neatly laid out, unfinished projects waiting on the table, the smell of wood and varnish in the air. Pushing the heavy workbench aside, I found an inconspicuous hatch in the floor. The key fit the lock perfectly. Inside was a metal box and a pile of yellowed papers. I carefully took them out and spread them out on the workbench. What I saw made me sit up. These were detailed descriptions and photographs of every piece of furniture that my father had restored or created. Each one was accompanied by a certificate of antique value and a document transferring ownership in my name, all dated 3 months before his death, all notarized. I called Silas Decker, who answered immediately. You found the documents, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I did. Why didn't you tell me about them today? Wilfred made me promise not to mention them first, he explained. He said you would find what he left behind if you needed to. These documents, are they legitimate? I asked, flipping through the pages. Wilfred was very methodical. Every document is properly certified. The house may go to Mercedes, but everything in these papers belongs to you, Brianna. And this is a significant part of the interior. I thanked him and hung up the phone, feeling my heart pounding. Dad had foreseen everything. He knew his wife and youngest daughter better than I thought. I spent the rest of the day getting ready. I called a moving company and arranged for a truck to come out in the morning. I contacted Audrey and a few other friends who agreed to help. I took pictures of every room, every important item, and made a detailed inventory of everything that belonged to me according to my father's documents. When my mother returned late at night, I was already in my room, pretending to sleep. I could hear her walking around downstairs, rearranging things, perhaps already planning changes. The next day started early. Audrey arrived at 8 in the morning with her van, followed by a truck with movers. My mother watched with an expression of restrained satisfaction as they took out my personal belongings, clothes, books, a few small souvenirs. "You're taking so little," she said as I passed by with the last box of books. "Only the essentials," I replied. She frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "You'll see," I said, getting into Audrey's car. As we drove away, I looked back at the house one last time, not with sadness, but with a strange sense of accomplishment. 48 hours had passed. A new chapter of my life was beginning. And what I had left for Mercedes, she would discover very soon. I spent the first 3 days in Audrey's guest room, trying to pick up the pieces of my life. Her small cottage was cozy but overflowing with my boxes. Maxwell the Labrador welcomed me with enthusiasm, especially when I started cooking dinners for everyone, the only way I could thank them for taking me in. "I shouldn't have even left the kitchen if I'd known you were cooking like this," Audrey joked as she tasted my lasagna. I smiled weakly. Dad loved good food, and after his stroke, he could only eat certain foods. I learned how to make them delicious, not just dietary. "If you could have seen what I did," I said, putting down my fork, "do you think I crossed the line?" Audrey shrugged. "If the papers are legitimate, you just took what was yours." "But I took almost everything," I admitted. "The house is practically empty now." "And that's a shame," Audrey replied without a trace of regret. It must have been an impressive sight. I imagined my mother and Mercedes entering the empty house and felt a strange mixture of guilt and satisfaction. Perhaps for the first time in my life, I had done something that I was completely in control of without trying to please them. At the same moment, as if on cue, my phone rang. Mercedes's name flashed on the screen. I looked at Audrey, who raised her eyebrows. "I think they just got home," I said, dismissing the call. 30 seconds later, the phone rang again. This time it was my mother. I rejected it again. Then came a message: "Put everything back immediately or I will call the police." "Mom, let her call," Audrey said, reading over my shoulder. "You have all the documents. Silas will confirm." I didn't answer the phone or the text. Instead, I turned on an old movie Audrey and I had loved since high school and tried to distract myself. "I wish I could be a fly on the wall right now," I admitted. Audrey smiled slyly. "Well, I'm not a fly, but I could drive by and see what's going on. My neighbor, Mrs. Pearson, is friends with my aunt, and she's probably watching through her window right now." An hour later, Audrey returned with a pecan pie from Mrs. Pearson and the latest news. "Oh, Bree, that was epic!" she exclaimed, kicking off her shoes. "Your mother screamed so loud you could hear it all the way down the street. Mercedes ran out onto the lawn as I drove by and was talking to someone on the phone, probably a lawyer, and Mrs. Pearson said she looked out the window and saw nothing, just bare walls. I tried to feel sorry, but I couldn't. Instead, I felt a sense of justice. I couldn't help but imagine how they had entered the house after my evacuation. Mercedes must have solemnly opened the door, already imagining how she would show the elegant interior to potential buyers. "Here, Mom, this is officially ours now," she must have said, opening the living room door wide, and froze on the threshold. The room, which until 3 days ago had been filled with antique furniture, family heirlooms, paintings, and trinkets, was now empty. There were only bare walls and a worn carpet. Not a single chair, not a single table, not a single shelf. What? What happened? My mother must have whispered as she followed. They must have rushed from room to room, looking for something, but everywhere the same. A dining room without the exquisite 19th century table and chairs. A library without bookcases and a father's chair. Bedrooms without beds and chests of drawers. Even the handmade door handles were removed and replaced with simple, functional ones. On the kitchen table, the only piece of furniture I had left was a copy of all the documents my father had given me, along with a detailed list of all the items I had legally taken. I snapped back to reality when Maxwell put his head in my lap, demanding attention. I even took the chandelier in the living room, I confessed to Audrey, the one that my father restored 2 years ago, and all the paintings he had framed. Did you leave them anything? Audrey asked, petting the dog. The stove, the washing machine, I answered, and the mattress in my mom's bedroom. I'm not exactly a monster. The next day I started looking for an apartment. My savings were modest, but enough for a down payment. The boxes of personal belongings stayed with Audrey, and I sent the furniture and family heirlooms to a storage unit I rented right after I met Silas. A week later, I found a small studio apartment in an old restored building near the hospital where I planned to get a job. The apartment was small, but it had high ceilings and large windows that overlooked a quiet courtyard with a fountain. I was just climbing the stairs with the first box of things when the door of the neighboring apartment opened and a man in his 40s with a pleasant face and tousled dark hair peeked out. "Are you the new neighbor?" he asked with a smile. Before I could answer, he took the box from my hands. "I'm Felix Rogers," he introduced himself as we entered my apartment. "I live across the hall." "Brianna Harlow," I replied, feeling unusually shy. "I'm glad to welcome you to our little community," he said, looking around the empty room. "Just moving in?" "Yeah, things are still on the way," I replied, though it wasn't entirely true. Most of my furniture was still in storage because it didn't fit in the small apartment. "I'm a veterinarian at the clinic 2 blocks away," Felix said as he helped me unpack my books. "I'm a nurse," I answered. "I mean, I used to be. I'm planning to re-enter the profession." We talked for almost an hour as we unpacked my things. Felix was not only a good listener, but also a great storyteller. He told me about his animal patients, about his cat named Shakespeare, about how he moved here 3 years ago after his divorce. "I'm sorry, I'm talking too much," he stopped suddenly. "I'm just glad to see a new face." "That's okay," I smiled. "I like to listen. I've been living very isolated for the last 5 years." When he left, promising to show me the best coffee shop in the neighborhood the next morning, I felt strangely elated. Maybe this forced move wasn't so bad after all. 2 days later, when I was almost settled in, my mother came over. I was on my way back from the grocery store when I saw her at the entrance, slim, elegant, and with a tense expression on her face. "Brianna," she said instead of greeting me, "we need to talk." I led her into the apartment, trying not to show my excitement. She looked around as if assessing my new home. "Not bad," she said dryly, "but certainly not what you're used to." "I like it," I replied, putting the groceries away. She sat down on the only chair in the room, folding her hands in her lap as she always did before a serious conversation. "You have to give the things back, Brianna," she said bluntly. "What you did was stealing." "The papers are all legal," I replied calmly. "Dad gave me ownership of these things when he was alive. I left copies of all the papers." "You know he didn't know what he was signing," she insisted. That was a blatant lie, and we both knew it. Dad had problems with the right side of his body, but his mind remained clear until his last days. The doctors and notaries who certified the documents would disagree with you, I replied. My mother's face paled. A video? Yes. He wanted to make sure that his wishes would be fulfilled, I said, feeling strangely calm, and that no one could claim he was disoriented. My mother was silent for a while, obviously rethinking her strategy. Mercedes is desperate, she finally said. She was planning to sell the house and use the money to move to Europe. Now, without the furniture, the price, it has dropped, I finished for her. The house is much less attractive to buyers, especially for those who appreciate antiques and the original interior. That's cruel, Brianna, my mother said with a hint of accusation. I didn't think you were capable of such meanness. Something inside me clicked. Years of humility and trying to please suddenly burst like a bubble. Cruel? I repeated, raising my voice. Cruel is throwing out the daughter who has been caring for her sick father for 5 years. It's cruel to ignore a man's last will and testament and rewrite it behind his back. It is cruel to plan to sell a house that has belonged to the family for 3 generations without even consulting everyone. My mother looked at me with wide eyes. She had never heard me speak in such a tone. I always tried to be a good daughter, I continued in a quieter voice, always looking for your approval, which never came. For you, there was only Mercedes. Even now, you're not here because you care about me, but because Mercedes can't sell the house for the price she wants. That's not fair, my mother protested weakly. I've always loved you both equally. That's not true, I replied calmly. But you know what? It doesn't matter now. I am no longer that little girl desperate for your attention. I am a grown woman who makes her own decisions. My mother stood up, her lips trembling. You're going to regret this, Brianna. Maybe, I agreed, but not today. After she left, I felt a strange lightness, as if I had lifted a heavy burden that I had been carrying all my life. For the first time, I didn't give in, didn't back down, didn't try to please. That evening, Audrey called me. You're not gonna believe this, she exclaimed instead of greeting me. Your sister put the house up for sale, but no one wants to buy it. How do you know? I asked, although I already knew the source of the information. She said that 3 different real estate agents had come by and all said the same thing. Without the original furniture and antiques, the house had lost its charm and a lot of its value. One agent even compared it to a clamshell without a pearl. I should have felt triumphant, but instead I felt only peace. It was not revenge, just justice. The house, like the things in it, had a soul that couldn't be simply sold to the highest bidder. Do you think they'll understand? I asked quietly. Understand what? That it's not about things or money. It's about respect for the family, for history, for my father's memory. Audrey sighed on the other end of the line. I don't know, Bree, but you did what you had to do, and I'm proud of you. Through the window, I could see Felix coming home from work, carrying a paper bag that must have contained dinner. He waved to me, and I waved back. A new life was beginning, not the one I had planned, but maybe just the one I needed. 8 months flew by faster than I could have imagined. Autumn gave way to winter, winter to spring, and now it's June, a life I hadn't planned, but which gradually wove a new pattern around me. I returned to work as a nurse at a local hospital, first part-time, then full-time. 5 months later, I was promoted to head nurse of the intensive care unit. My experience of caring for my father proved invaluable. I understood patients and their families on a level that many colleagues could not. I don't know how you do it, Brianna, head nurse Diana once said after a difficult shift. The Clifford family wouldn't talk to anyone on the staff, but they trusted you. That's a real gift. I just shrugged my shoulders. It wasn't a gift, just experience and understanding of how important it is to be heard in the most difficult moments of life. My small apartment gradually turned into a home. I brought a few of my favorite items from the warehouse. My dad's rocking chair, which fit perfectly in the corner by the window, an old bookcase that we restored together when I was 16, a wall clock that chimed the hours with a melodic sound. At first, Felix and I just greeted each other in the hallway. Then we started drinking coffee together on Saturdays at the coffee shop on the corner. One evening, when the power went out in the house, he invited me to a candlelit dinner, a practical solution that grew into a tradition of weekly dinners together. You know, you're not the same as you were in the beginning, he said one evening as we sat on his balcony with glasses of wine. His cat Shakespeare was napping on my lap. Back then, you were kind of closed off, unsure. Now, you have some inner strength. I smiled, feeling warmth spread through my chest. We hadn't yet crossed the line between friendship and something more, but we both felt like we were moving toward it, slowly, carefully, enjoying every step. I didn't talk to my mom and Mercedes all those months. Sometimes I received short messages from my mother, mostly informative, without emotion. Aunt Judy's birthday is on Saturday. Mrs. Pearson asked about you. I answered just as briefly, not out of anger or resentment, but because I felt that we hadn't yet built a bridge for real communication. Audrey kept me informed through Mrs. Pearson. The house still hasn't sold, she said during our traditional Sunday meeting. Mercedes has lowered the price for the third time, but there are no buyers. It seems she's given up on working in Europe. I nodded, feeling a strange lack of gloating. I didn't want Mercedes to suffer, just to make her realize the value of what she had tried to so easily discard. On Tuesday, as I was returning from my evening shift, I was met on the stairs by the building's concierge, an elderly woman named Gloria. Ms. Harlow, a young man came to see you, she said. He left an envelope, said it was important. The envelope was official, with the logo of Silas Decker's law firm. Inside was a short note from his assistant, Noah Sterling. Ms. Harlow, an additional document has been found regarding your father's estate. Please report to the office on Thursday at 10 in the morning. Your presence is required, as is that of your mother and sister. I read the note twice, feeling my heart speed up. What else could my father have left behind? And why was it only now that we found out? On Thursday, I arrived at Decker's office at 10 o'clock sharp. My mother and Mercedes were already waiting in the reception area, sitting on opposite ends of the couch. Mercedes looked tired with shadows under her eyes. My mother tried to keep her composure, but her tense posture betrayed her anxiety. Brianna, she nodded instead of greeting me. Mom, I replied, sitting down across from her. My sister nodded slightly, not meeting my eyes. She had lost weight and looked less well-groomed than usual. Noah Sterling, Silas's young assistant, invited us into his office. Silas himself was waiting behind the desk, holding a sealed envelope. Thank you for coming, he said as we took our seats. I must apologize for the delay. This document was found only a week ago when we were moving into our new office. It was hidden in an old safe in a separate compartment. What is it? Mercedes asked eagerly. Silas opened the envelope and pulled out several sheets of paper stapled together. It's an addendum to Wilfred Harlow's will, drawn up 6 months before his death. It deals with financial assets that he did not mention in the main will. Mother straightened in her chair. What assets? Mr. Harlow had an investment account that none of you seem to have known about, Silas explained. He started it 30 years ago when he received a small inheritance from his uncle. And how much are we talking about? Mercedes asked, trying to sound indifferent, but I could see a twinkle in her eye. Silas gave a figure that took our breath away. It was enough money to live comfortably for many years, even without additional income. However, Silas continued, Wilfred has set a condition. The money is to be divided equally between Brianna and Mercedes, provided they fulfill his wishes regarding the family home. What wishes? I asked, although I already knew. The house must remain in the Harlow family and be restored to its original form, with all the furniture and heirlooms in place, Silas replied. It must become a place for family gatherings, preserving the history of 3 generations. If this condition is not met within a year of the announcement of this document, all funds will go to charity, the city's Historic Building Restoration Fund. The room fell silent. Mother looked at her hands. Mercedes looked out the window. I felt a warmth spreading in my chest. Dad had foreseen everything again. So I have to return all the furniture to the house? I finally asked. And refuse to sell it? Mercedes added almost simultaneously. Silas nodded. That's right. The house must remain jointly owned by the Harlow sisters, with Irene's right to live there for the rest of her life if she so chooses. That's not possible, Mercedes said suddenly, her voice breaking. I, I'm in trouble. I was counting on the money from the sale of the house. I looked at my sister, suddenly noticing signs I'd missed before: cheaper than usual jewelry, scuffs on a bag she would have replaced long ago. What's wrong? I asked quietly. Mercedes sighed, avoiding my gaze. Investments. A bad investment. I invested all my savings in a project that was supposed to be a huge profit, but the company went bankrupt, and that's why you were in such a hurry to sell the house, I realized. Mercedes didn't tell me the extent of the problem. My mother interjected. I thought she just wanted to start a new life in Europe. I looked at my younger sister, and instead of gloating, I felt only compassion. She always tried to impress everyone, to be the best, the most successful, and for the first time in her life, she had failed. How much do you need to cover your debts? I asked. Mercedes gave me a figure, a significant amount, but less than half of what my father left us. If we fulfill Dad's wishes, it will be enough money for everyone, I said slowly. You can pay off your debts and use the rest to make a fresh start. But how? She asked doubtfully. The house is empty, the repairs need money, and we both have jobs and lives of our own. Who's going to take care of it? I looked at Silas, then at my mother, and finally at Mercedes. 2 months after that meeting, I was standing on the porch of my family's house, holding the keys. Next to me was Mercedes, who was nervously shifting from foot to foot. Do you think this will work? She asked. We'll find out, I replied, opening the door. We entered an empty living room where an architect and an interior designer were already waiting for us. My plan was simple: to turn the first floor of the house into a space for family gatherings and the second floor into 2 separate guest suites. My mother could live in one of them if she wanted, and the other could be used for guests or rented out. How long will the restoration take? Mercedes asked as we walked around the rooms. About 4 months, the architect replied, given that all the original furniture is still there and just needs to be put back in place. Mercedes and I did not become close friends during these 2 months, but we learned to cooperate. She took care of financial issues. I took care of organizational issues. It was hard for both of us, but somehow we found common ground. You know, Mercedes said one day, when we were sorting through old photos to restore the family gallery in the hallway, I've always envied your relationship with your dad. I looked at her in surprise. You? Me? But you've always been a favorite. Of my mom, yes, she interrupted. But my dad, he always had a special connection with you. You understood each other without words. I felt left out. I thought you just weren't interested in him, I admitted. Mercedes sighed. It was difficult for me. I didn't know how to communicate with him after the stroke. I was afraid of doing something wrong. And then it was too late. We were silent as we looked through the photos. Dad with us at the picnic, Dad in the workshop, Dad dancing with Mom on their anniversary. He would be proud of what we're doing now, I finally said. Mercedes nodded, and tears shone in her eyes. On the last day of fall, we completed the restoration. All the furniture was back in its place, the walls were painted in their original colors, and the floors were restored. The house breathed life again. In honor of this, we organized a small celebration. We invited Aunt Judy and her husband, my mother's cousin Randall, Mrs. Pearson, Audrey, even Felix, who became an important part of my life. My mother, who was initially skeptical about the idea of transforming the house, now seemed happy. She had decided to live in one of the apartments upstairs, closer to her friends and her normal life. "Don't you want to move back here?" she asked me when we were alone in the kitchen. I shook my head. "No, Mom. I have my own home now." And it was true. My small apartment with its high ceilings and windows to the patio had become my real home. Felix's apartment across the street was, in a way, too, because we spent almost as much time there as we did in mine. Our relationship developed slowly but surely, and recently, I started thinking for the first time about maybe living together someday. In my living room, there was my father's rocking chair, a clock that we had restored together on the wall, and his photo on the mantelpiece. I took only those things that were of personal importance to me. The rest belonged to the house and had to stay there as part of Harlow's history. Returning home late in the evening after the holiday, I held Felix's hand. We walked slowly, enjoying the cool air and the silence. "Are you happy with how things turned out?" he asked as we approached our house. I thought for a moment, looking up at the starry sky. "Yes," I finally answered. "I think Dad would be happy." The house was home again, albeit in a new format. "And you?" Felix insisted. "Are you happy with your new life?" I squeezed his hand and smiled. More than satisfied. I am happy. And that was the truth. 8 months ago, I thought I had lost everything: my home, my family, my past. But in fact, I found something much more important: myself. The realization that true home is not in the walls, but in a sense of inner harmony and self-respect. The life I was building now was my own choice, not the result of someone else's decisions or expectations. As I walked up the stairs to my apartment, I thought about my father, how he always believed in me, even when I didn't, how he left me not just a material inheritance, but something much more valuable, a lesson that sometimes the greatest strength is not in confrontation, but in the ability to let go and start over. In my apartment, I went to the window and looked out at the city, sparkling with lights in the darkness. Shakespeare, Felix's cat, who now spent a lot of time in my apartment, rubbed against my legs. I took him in my arms and sat in my father's rocking chair, listening to the old clock ticking away the time, past and future, merging into one continuous now.